All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, good to be back.
Today, we are going to be tackling something I think we all have to deal with at some point or another.
Yeah.
It's how to deal with those people who don't necessarily show us the respect that we deserve.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And so we are going to be using this article called 8 Ways to Deal with People Who Don't Respect You with scenarios.
Love that.
Yeah, it's a really, really good article.
It is a good one.
Yeah. And there are so many things that I think we can unpack from it, and so much good information. But, you know, I was reading it and I was particularly kind of drawn to this idea of just like walking away.
Oh, interesting.
Like, is that something that you've had to do a lot, or?
I think it's something I've had to do, but it's interesting that you bring that up right away because the article actually presents walking away as kind of like a last resort.
Yeah, right.
Before we even get to that point, I think it's so important to sort of suss out like why people are disrespecting other people in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think fuels that kind of behavior?
You know, I think the article touched on it really well when they kind of mentioned that oftentimes it is coming from a place of insecurity in the other person, right? So it's like almost like they're projecting their own issues out onto other people. And of course, like that doesn't really make it any easier to deal with, especially when you're trying to like set boundaries, which the article talks a lot about. And it seems really straightforward, but like, why do you think setting boundaries is so effective?
It's interesting because I think a lot of it has to do with psychology, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah.
It's like we as humans, we're just wired to respond to really clear signals.
Yeah.
You know, when you're in a meeting and somebody constantly interrupts you,
right,
and you say very clearly and calmly, like, please let me finish my thought.
Yeah.
It disrupts the pattern that they're used to. You know, it introduces a consequence that maybe they weren't anticipating.
Yeah, it's like you're almost like training them to respect your boundaries.
Oh, really?
You're like, hey, you cross this line, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, you get a reaction you didn't expect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've definitely noticed that when I am more assertive, that, you know, people tend to treat me with a little bit more respect.
Absolutely. And that circles back to one of the key points in the article, which is like the importance of self-respect.
Yeah.
Right? They talk about how oftentimes the disrespect that you're receiving from other people has more to do with them than it does with you.
Right.
And I think that's so important to remember.
Yeah.
And they have this example in the article of somebody making like a sarcastic comment about your appearance.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And they suggest responding with something like, I'm comfortable with who I am.
Yeah.
You know, something along those lines.
Totally.
And that I think is a great way to just sort of deflect that negativity and model self-respect at the same time.
Right. It's so easy, though, to internalize those comments, right? It's so easy to be like, oh, gosh, you know, maybe they're right. Maybe there is something wrong with me.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's really not about us and it's about them.
It's their stuff and it's not yours. Yeah.
And that's why the article is really emphasizing that you can't really take it personally.
Yeah.
Right? It's about focusing on like your own strengths and like your own contributions.
Exactly.
They gave the example of like a colleague dismissing your ideas in a meeting, and oh my gosh, like that that is so frustrating.
It's the worst.
And the thing is it's like, you know, you can't let their negativity define you.
Whoa.
And you can't let it like get you down or make you feel like your ideas are not good or
totally. And I think it's so easy to kind of get sucked into that dynamic too.
Yeah.
Where, you know, if you work with somebody who's constantly putting you down or dismissing your ideas, you can start to second guess yourself.
Right.
Start to wonder if, you know, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not good at this. But that's just not true. You know, it's important to kind of step back and remember your own worth and your own strengths and your own accomplishments.
Okay, so we've talked about setting boundaries. We've talked about self-respect. We've talked about not internalizing these things.
Yeah.
But what about the whole communication aspect? Because the article's really big on addressing these issues directly, but calmly, right? And using I statements, which, like, have you ever struggled with that? Because sometimes I just want to let loose.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
I think we all have those moments where we just want to, you know, scream and shout and tell the person exactly how we're feeling. But, you know, the article's point about using I statements is so valid because it helps to de-escalate the situation. You know, instead of saying, like, you always cancel on me at the last minute, try saying something like, I feel unimportant when plans are canceled at the last minute.
Right.
You know, it's about expressing the impact of their actions on you rather than attacking them as a person.
Yeah, and it's like shifting that focus from blame
Exactly.
to understanding, right?
Yeah.
Which I feel like could be a lot more productive sometimes.
Way more productive.
But then what happens when, even with, the best communication and the clearest, boundaries, and you're doing all the right things, and some people just are still disrespectful?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
What do you do?
Well, that's where I think the article's advice about limiting exposure comes in.
Yeah.
And this is something that I have personally found incredibly helpful over the years. Sometimes you just need to reduce your contact with those people who are consistently draining you and disrespecting you.
Yeah.
You don't have to subject yourself to that.
Right, and it's almost like you're creating that buffer zone for like your own mental well-being.
Totally. It's about self-preservation,
Yeah. And the article also talks about, seeking support during those times too.
Yes.
And I think that could be so valuable. Who do you tend to turn to when you kind of need to process these situations?
Well, I think it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But for me, I've always found it really helpful to have like a network of trusted friends, mentors, therapists, even, people who can offer an objective perspective and remind you of your worth.
Yeah. That outside support can be so validating sometimes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit, because the article talks about, staying composed.
Right.
Even in the face of someone who is like, yelling at you.
Yes.
And, having that neutral response.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to like employ that technique?
Oh my gosh, more times than I can count. And it's amazing how effective it can be.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're mirroring back to them their lack of control.
Wow.
Which can sometimes make them even more frustrated, but it allows you to stay centered.
Yeah.
And it allows you to kind of remain calm and not get sucked into their drama.
And then there's that last resort, right?
Right.
Which is walking away, which, as we were saying earlier, is like a really hard call to make.
Yep.
But I think sometimes it really is the healthiest option.
I agree. The example they give in the article of a toxic friendship is a perfect example of this.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to prioritize your own well-being and step away from those relationships that are no longer serving you.
Yeah. And I think it makes you think about like, what are your non-negotiables?
Yeah.
What are those things where you just say like, enough is enough?
Totally.
And I think that that's something that we all kind of need to reflect on.
Absolutely. You get to decide what you're willing to put up with.
Right. And I think that so often we kind of forget.
Yeah.
We think that we have to just sort of like take it.
Tolerate it.
But we really don't.
You don't.
So to wrap things up, we've kind of explored this range of strategies for dealing with disrespectful people.
Yes.
From setting boundaries to communicating effectively to knowing when to just walk away.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so empowering to realize that we do have choices.
We do. You always have the power to decide how much disrespect you're willing to tolerate in your life.
Right.
And I think that's such an important message to remember.
And, these 8 strategies that are in the article are really just a starting point.
Exactly. You can pick and choose the ones that resonate with you the most.
Exactly. And you know what works best for you, because not every technique is going to work in every situation.
For sure.
And, who knows, maybe we'll even do a future deep dive on like building confidence or something like that.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Or setting those healthy boundaries. But
I think that'd be a great topic.
Yeah. Until then, keep those I statements handy and just remember your worth, everybody.
Your worth. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See ya.